If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first met Sarah in a dusty university library, that I would one day find myself standing on her family's farm, my heart a frantic, trapped bird in my chest, all because of her brother, I would have laughed. A dry, academic sort of laugh. The kind that says, highly improbable. Yet here I was. The air smelled of damp earth, and something else, something wild and green that the city scrubbed from existence. It was a place of profound quiet, a quiet so deep it had its own sound, a low hum that vibrated right through the soles of my worn-out city boots. My life was built on quiet. It was a carefully constructed fortress of solitude and routine. My apartment was a testament to this. Books ordered by subject, and then alphabetically, a single coffee mug, a laptop that held the sprawling, labyrinthine mess of my doctoral dissertation on agrarian labor patterns in the pre-industrial era. My world was small, contained, and entirely under my control. I liked it that way, or at least, I had convinced myself that I did. Solitude was a shield. It was safe. Then there was Caleb. He wasn't part of my world. He was a planet unto himself, a gravitational force I had spent years trying to carefully orbit without ever getting pulled in. Sarah's older brother, the farmer, the one in all her stories who was built of stone and silence. From a distance, he was an archetype, a figure sketched in charcoal against the wide, unforgiving sky of this place. Strong, capable, impenetrable. Up close, he was overwhelming. He didn't just occupy space, he commanded it. He was tall, broad in a way that wasn't about muscle from a gym, but about years of actual relentless work. His skin was tan from a sun I only ever felt through window panes, and his hand were a roadmap of his life. Calloused and scarred, they looked like they could fix an engine or calm a nervous horse with equal, unnerving competence. I was, by contrast, a creature of soft hands and softer opinions. My battles were fought with footnotes and citations. My greatest physical exertion was carrying a stack of books back from the library. Standing near him always made me feel like an unfinished sentence, a footnote in the grand, earthy novel of his life. The distance between us was more than just city versus country. It was a chasm. He moved with a certainty that I, in my world of theories and abstracts, could never possess. When he looked at me, which was rare, his gaze was direct, assessing. It felt like he could see every flimsy, carefully constructed wall I had built around myself and find them wanting. He probably thought I was a joke. Sarah's strange, quiet friend who read dead languages and probably couldn't change a tire. He wasn't wrong. This trip was supposed to be a retreat, a place to finish the final, brutal chapter of my dissertation, with Sarah as a buffer. A friendly face to dilute the potent, unnerving presence of her brother. We had a system. I'd hide in the guest room with my laptop. She'd bring me coffee, and we'd pretend I wasn't a complete social anomaly. Caleb would be a peripheral figure, a shadow moving at the edge of my vision. Manageable. That plan lasted exactly 12 hours. The phone call came during breakfast. Sarah's face crumpled, a sudden, shocking collapse of her usual bright expression. Her partner's mother. A fall. A hospital. She was on the road within the hour, a blur of hurried apologies and worried glances back at me. "Caleb will look after you," she'd said, a statement that landed in the quiet kitchen like a dropped stone. It was meant to be reassuring. It felt like a sentence. And then it was just us. The silence he left in his wake was different from my silence. Mine was a comfortable blanket. His was a weapon. It was heavy, judgmental. After Sarah's car disappeared down the long gravel drive, he stood by the sink, his back to me, a solid wall of denim and muscle. He didn't say a word. The air grew thick, soupy with unspoken awkwardness. My heart started its familiar, frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Say something. Anything. I can call a cab to the train station," I offered to his back. My voice sounded thin, reedy. "I don't want to be a bother." He turned, and the full force of his attention was like a physical blow. His eyes were a startling, clear blue, the color of a winter sky. They held no warmth. "Don't be stupid. Sarah would kill me." He dried his hands on a towel. the motion economical and precise. You can stay. Just stay out of the way. It wasn't unkind. Not exactly. It was just a statement of fact. A boundary line drawn in the dust. I was a foreign object in his world, and his only requirement was that I not interfere with its delicate, demanding mechanics. I nodded, my throat too tight to form a reply. I retreated to the guest room, my fortress, and listened to the sounds of him moving through the house, the solid, heavy tread of his boots a constant reminder of my displacement. The disruption came that afternoon, not as a shout, but as a sudden, jarring silence. The rhythmic chug of the irrigation pump that had been the background noise to my frantic, unproductive typing just stopped. A few minutes later, I heard Caleb swear a low, guttural sound that seemed to carry all the frustration in the world. I peered out the window and saw him standing by the pump, hands on his hips, staring down at the silent machinery as if he could intimidate it back to life. This was it, the inciting incident. The moment the universe decided my carefully curated solitude was no longer a viable option. He kicked the metal housing, gesture of pure, unadulterated anger that was somehow more vulnerable than anything I had ever seen from him. Then he looked up, his gaze sweeping the property, and for a terrifying second, it landed on my window. On me. My first instinct was to duck, to hide, to pretend I was just another piece of furniture. But I didn't. I watched as he stalked back towards the barn, his shoulders tight with a tension that was almost visible. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that my role as a quiet, unobtrusive guest was about to end. The farm had a problem, and I was the only other pair of hands available. Useless, soft, academic hands. He found me in the kitchen, where I was pretending to be deeply absorbed in making tea, as if that were a vital and complex task. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Pump shot," he said, his voice flat. He was wiping grease from his hands with a rag, but it only seemed to smear the blackness around. "Gasket's blown. I need to pull the whole assembly." "It's a two-man job," he didn't ask. He stated. The unspoken end of that sentence hung in the air between us, and you're the only other man here. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. My stomach felt like it was full of bees. Me, in a barn, with tools, and Caleb. It was a combination of elements so far outside my comfort zone that I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. "You any good with a wrench?" he asked, and it was a real question, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I can hold things," I said, the lamest possible response. A small, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Good enough. Get some more clothes on. Something you don't mind ruining." He was already turning away, his focus back on the problem, on the mechanics of his world. I was just a component he now had to factor in. A clumsy, inefficient, but necessary part. Working with him was a lesson in humility. The barn was his kingdom, a cavernous space that smelled of oil and hay and livestock. Tools I couldn't name hung in perfect order on the walls. He moved through the space with an innate, physical intelligence that I could only envy. He knew how things worked, how they fit together, how to fix them when they broke. My job, as predicted, was to hold things. I held a heavy socket wrench while he strained against a rusted bolt. I held a flashlight, trying to keep the beam steady as he peered into the greasy guts of the machine. I braced the heavy pump housing as he worked to free it from its moorings. My muscles, accustomed to nothing more strenuous than typing, began to scream in protest. But the proximity was the real torture. I was closer to him than I had ever been. Close enough to see the fine, white lines that fanned out from the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Close enough to see a faded scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection in his otherwise stoic facade. I wondered, inanely, how he got it. A childhood fall? A fight? A piece of machinery, like this one, that had rebelled? I noticed the weariness in him then. It wasn't just in his eyes. It was in the slight slump of his shoulders when he thought I wasn't looking. It was in the deep sigh he let out when another bolt refused to budge. The confident, intimidating man I had always observed from a distance was up close just a man with a broken pump and a farm that depended on it, carrying the weight of it all by himself. He was surprisingly patient. He never snapped when I held the light at the wrong angle or almost dropped a tool. He would just say, "Leo," a little to the left, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the metal we both touched. He used my name. It felt strange. In all the years I had known Sarah, I wasn't sure her brother had ever said my name before. The moment happened when we were trying to lift the main assembly out. It was heavy, awkward, slick with grease. "On three," he grunted. "1, 2, 3. We heaved, and for a second my grip slipped. The heavy metal housing lurched, and to steady myself, my hand shot out, landing squarely on his forearm. It was like touching a live wire. His skin was hot, solid muscle, and bone beneath a light dusting of hair. The shock of it jolted through me, a pure, unadulterated current of heat that shot up my arm and settled deep in my chest. My breath hitched. For a fraction of a second, the world narrowed to that single point of contact. My soft, useless hand on his strong, capable arm. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. My face flushed, a tide of heat crawling up my neck. I was sure he'd felt it. The jolt, the panic, the everything I kept so carefully locked away. I braced myself for a look of disgust, a sharp word, a shove. But Caleb just adjusted his grip on the pump. "You good?" he asked, his focus entirely on the machine. He hadn't noticed. Or, if he had dismissed it as a simple side effect of the physical effort. A muscle twitch. Nothing more. The relief was so profound it almost made me weak at the knees. The disappointment was a bitter, surprising chaser. I mumbled a yes, and we lifted again, this time successfully maneuvering the heavy piece of equipment onto a waiting tarp. My hand tingled for the rest of the afternoon, a phantom echo of the contact. A brand. We worked in near silence after that, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghost of that touch, with my frantic internal monologue, with a new, terrifying awareness of the man beside me. By late afternoon, we were both filthy, streaked with grease and sweat. The pump was disassembled, the broken gasket identified. A small victory. Caleb straightened up, rolling his shoulders with a groan. He looked at the mess, then at me. "I need to order the part. Won't be here till tomorrow, maybe the day after." He dragged a hand through his already messy hair. "Which means the top field won't get watered." He said it to himself more than to me. The frustration was back in his voice. I saw an opening, a chance to be something other than the guy who holds a flashlight. "Is there a workaround?" I asked. He gave me a tired look. "Not a good one. I can run a gravity feed from the top cistern, but the pressure will be too low. It's a waste of water." And then a dusty file cabinet in the back of my mind creaked open. A half-remembered chapter from a book I'd read for my dissertation research. What about a siphon system? If you can get the initial flow started, the elevation drop should maintain it. "It's more efficient than a straight gravity feed." Caleb stared at me. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated skepticism. It was the look of a man who dealt in the tangible being presented with a theory from a book. "A siphon? With that much hose? You'd never get it primed. You could," I insisted, the words tumbling out of me, fueled by a sudden, desperate need to be useful. "If you fill the hose completely first, block both ends, lay it out, and then unblock the lower end first, the vacuum should hold. It's an old principle. They used it for aqueducts." I stopped, horrified. I was lecturing him, on his own farm, on a subject he lived and breathed. I was being the exact academic cliché he probably thought I was. I waited for the dismissive snort, the eye roll. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes narrowed, not in dismissal, but in thought. He was actually considering it. He was looking at the long coils of hose against the barn wall, then back at me. The power dynamic for one brief, dizzying moment had shifted. I wasn't the weakling needing protection. I was the one with the idea. "Show me," he said finally. And that was it. Not a concession, but a command. A challenge. It took us nearly 2 hours. It was a clumsy, wet, frustrating process. We had to fill hundreds of feet of heavy hose with water from a tank, a process that involved more fumbling and swearing than I thought possible. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and bruised purple. We stood at the edge of the parched-top field. The hose snaked down the gentle slope from the cistern. Caleb held the lower end, his expression still doubtful. "You sure about this, city boy?" he asked, a hint of something that might have been humor in his tone. "It's just physics," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My entire intellectual credibility felt like it was on the line. "Uncap your end," he pulled the cap off. For a tense second, nothing happened. My stomach plummeted. Of course it wouldn't work. It was a stupid idea from a dusty book. Then a gurgle, a trickle, and then a steady, gushing stream of water poured out of the hose and onto the thirsty ground. Caleb let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure surprise and relief. He looked from the water to me, and for the first time, he really smiled. Not the ghost of a smile from the kitchen, but a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. It made him look younger, less burdened. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. An old-fashioned siphon. My heart did a stupid, complicated flip in my chest. I had done something right. I had helped. I had earned that smile. In that moment, standing in the fading light, covered in mud and water, I felt a sense of belonging that my quiet, orderly apartment had never once given me. The chasm between us didn't seem so wide anymore. It seemed impossibly like something that could be crossed. That night, a storm rolled in. It came without warning, a sudden, violent assault of wind and rain that rattled the old farmhouse to its bones. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into a thick, disorienting darkness. The only sound was the howling of the wind and the relentless drumming of rain against the roof. "Fuse box is in the cellar." Caleb's voice came out of the dark, calm and steady. "Probably a trip breaker. Stay put." I heard him moving, his footsteps sure and certain even in the blackness. I, on the other hand, was completely immobilized. My world, the one I navigated through sight and logic, had been stripped away. I was useless again. A few minutes later, a warm, flickering light appeared in the hallway. It was Caleb, holding an old kerosene lantern. The light carved strange, dancing shadows on his face, making him look like a figure from another century. "Breaker's not tripped," he said, placing the lantern on the kitchen table. "Line must be down somewhere. We're out till they fix it." The storm raged outside, a wild, untamed thing. But inside, in the small circle of golden light from the lantern, a strange quiet descended. It was an intimate, enforced stillness. The distractions of the modern world, the television, the internet, the hum of the refrigerator, were gone. It was just us, and the storm, and the silence. He pulled out 2 beers from the now-silent fridge. He handed one to me. Our fingers brushed as I took it. This time, the touch was less of a jolt and more of a low, sustained hum. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. We sat at the kitchen table, the lantern casting a warm glow between us. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the awkward, heavy silence of before. It was something different, softer, more contemplative. "You're not what I expected," he said, his voice low. He was staring into the lantern's flame, not at me. My heart hammered against my ribs. "What did you expect?" He took a long drink of his beer before answering. "I don't know. Someone fragile. Someone who'd complain about the mud. Sarah talks about you like you're made of glass." "I'm not made of glass," I said quietly. "I just prefer libraries to barns." He finally looked at me, his blue eyes searching in the flickering light. "Why? Why spend your whole life reading about something when you could be out here doing it?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question, laced with the confusion I had seen in many people's eyes before. I thought for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Because the books, they tell you the why. You know how to do all this. You know when to plant, when to harvest. But I know why your great-grandfather planted wheat in that field instead of corn, and how the invention of the cotton gin in another country changed the economy of a town like this. I'm interested in the echoes, the patterns, the ghosts in the machine." He was quiet, turning my words over. He wasn't dismissing them. He was listening. "I always figured you looked down on this life," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Thought I was just some dumb farmer. The confession hit me with the force of a physical blow. "No," I said, my voice thick with a sudden, unexpected emotion. "God, no. Caleb, I've never thought that. I think what you do is incredible. You create things. You make things grow. My work is all theory. It's all echoes, like I said. You're the thing that makes the echo, the space between us, seem to shrink, the air growing thick and heavy." The storm outside felt miles away. The only sound was our breathing, the hiss of a lantern. His gaze was locked on mine, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A vulnerability that mirrored my own. A loneliness that I recognized as intimately as my own reflection. He reached across the table, his calloused, grease-stained hand covering mine. His touch was warm, hesitant, a question. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched his face in the flickering light, my entire world narrowing to the weight of his hand on mine. "Leo," he said, and my name was a prayer, a confession. He stood up, pulling me with him, his hand never leaving mine. He led me from the kitchen into the dark living room, where the big picture window was a sheet of black, slick with rain. He stopped in the center of the room, turned to face me. The lantern light from the kitchen cast him in silhouette. He raised his other hand, the one that wasn't holding mine, and gently, so gently, touched my face. His thumb brushed against my cheekbone, the callous skin a rough, incredible friction against my own. "This is it," my mind screamed. "This is happening." He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. I leaned in to meet him, my eyes fluttering shut. His lips were chapped, hesitant, and tasted faintly of beer and rain. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was a question, a discovery. It was slow and deep and honest, a quiet conversation in a language I never thought I'd get to speak. It was the sound of a bridge being built in the dark, over a chasm I had long ago accepted as impassable. And when he pulled back, resting his forehead against mine, his breath warm on my face, the only thing I could think was, oh, this is what it feels like, to be seen, to be crossed. I woke to the unfamiliar sound of bird song in the stark, unforgiving light of morning. The storm had passed. The world outside was washed clean, bright, and painfully clear. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind still clinging to the dreamlike, flickering intimacy of the night before. The memory of Caleb's lips on mine, the solid weight of his body next to me on the old sofa where we had eventually fallen asleep, the scent of his skin, all of it felt more real than the quiet, empty guest room I was now in. I had woken up alone. A cold dread, familiar and sharp, began to seep into my bones. I sat up. My clothes were rumpled, and I felt a phantom ache in my neck from sleeping at an awkward angle. But the other side of the bed was empty. The sheets were cold. I must have woken up at some point in the night and stumbled back to my own room, where he had. My heart began to pound a frantic, anxious rhythm. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by the storm and the darkness. He regrets it. The thoughts came, a swarm of angry hornets. He's disgusted. With you. With himself. I crept out of the room. The house was silent. The power was back on. The refrigerator was humming its monotonous tune. The lantern was gone from the kitchen table. The empty beer bottles had been cleared away. It was as if last night had never happened. Every trace of it had been erased. I looked out the kitchen window, and there he was. He was already out in the field, his back to the house, mending a section of fence that must have been damaged in the storm. He moved with his usual relentless efficiency, a solid, solitary figure against the vast green landscape. He hadn't come to wake me. He hadn't left a note. He had just gone. The distance was back. It was a tangible thing, a wall of glass that had been erected between the house and the field. I could see him, but I couldn't reach him. The man who had touched my face with such impossible tenderness was gone, replaced by the stoic, impenetrable farmer I had first met. The anxiety was a physical thing now, a lead weight in my stomach. I made coffee, my hand shaking slightly. Every sound made me jump. The creak of a floorboard, the sigh of the wind. I was waiting for him to come back inside, waiting for the confrontation, for the awkward, pitying speech about how he was confused, how it didn't mean anything. But the morning wore on, and he didn't come in. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. It was worse than the silence before. That had been the silence of strangers. This was the silence of regret. My former solitude, the comfortable quiet of my apartment, felt like a paradise lost. This new solitude was a punishment. It was a hollow ache defined by his absence. I was an intruder again, a ghost in his house, haunting the scene of a crime he was trying to forget. I packed my bag. I did it slowly, methodically, folding my shirts with a precision that was completely at odds with the chaos in my mind. It was the only thing I could control. I would leave. I would go back to my world of books and footnotes. I would erase this trip, this night, this feeling from my memory. I would pretend it was a strange dream, a story that happened to someone else. It was the only way to survive the crushing weight of the humiliation. By noon, I couldn't stand it anymore. The silence was screaming. I took a deep breath, my bag waiting by the door like a loyal dog, and walked outside. The air was cool and clean after the rain. The sun felt warm on my face, a stark contrast to the chill inside me. He was still working on the fence, his back still to me. I walked towards him, each step feeling like I was wading through deep water. The squelch of my boots in the muddy ground sounded obscenely loud. He must have heard me, but he didn't turn around. He just kept twisting a wire with his pliers, his movements sharp, angry. I stopped a few feet behind him. My throat was dry. My carefully rehearsed speech about having to get back to the city, about a deadline I'd forgotten, it all evaporated. "Caleb," I said. My voice was a croak. He froze. His shoulders tensed, a solid line of resistance. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned to face me. His face was a mask. His jaw was tight, his blue eyes guarded, impossible to read. The man from last night was nowhere to be seen. "My bag is packed," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm going to call a cab." He just stared at me. The silence was a roaring in my ears. This was it. The dismissal. He would just nod, say okay, and turn back to his fence. And I would have to walk away, carrying the shattered pieces of whatever last night was. I saw a muscle jump in his jaw. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked down at the pliers in his hand, as if he'd never seen them before. Then he looked back up at me, and, for a split second, I saw a crack in the mask. I saw a flash of raw, unfiltered panic in his eyes. It was the same panic I was feeling. "Don't," he said. The word was rough, torn from him. "Don't go." He took a step towards me, dropping the pliers in the wet grass. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and strained. "Leo, I panicked. I woke up this morning and it was light, and everything was real, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say." The confession tumbled out of him in a rush, as if the dam had finally broken. This has never happened. With a guy. With anyone, not like this. I lay there, watching you sleep, and I was terrified. Of what this means. Of what Sarah would say. What my father would have said. This whole town. He gestured vaguely at the world beyond the fence line. I ran. I came out here to work because it's the only thing I know how to do when my head is a mess. Relief washed over me, so potent and overwhelming it almost buckled my knees. He wasn't disgusted. He was scared. He was just as scared as I was. "I thought you regretted it," I whispered. "No," he said, shaking his head, his eyes wide and earnest. "God, no. Regret was the last thing I felt. Scared, yeah. But the only thing I regret is how I acted this morning. Making you pack your bag." He looked past me, toward the house. "When I saw you walking out here, my heart it fell. I thought, he's leaving. You idiot. You scared him off." And then it was my turn. The walls I had so carefully rebuilt that morning crumbled to dust. "I've wanted this for years," I admitted, the words feeling impossibly loud in the quiet morning. "Ever since I first met you. I just never, ever thought it was possible. I thought you hated me." A look of profound shock crossed his face. "Hated you? Leo, I was intimidated by you. You're so smart. You have this whole other life, this world in your head. I was just the guy who fixed fences. We stood there, two strangers from different planets, finally speaking the same language. The language of fear and longing and profound, terrifying hope. All the assumptions, all the misinterpretations, all the years of silent observation, they all dissolved in the bright morning air. He reached out and took my hand. Not in the dark this time, not in the heat of a moment, but here, in the full, honest light of day. His grip was firm, sure. A statement. "Stay," he said, his voice steady now. "Please, don't go back to the city yet. Just stay." It was more than a request. It was a plea. "Okay," I breathed. "I'll stay." He let out a long, shuddering breath, and a slow smile spread across his face. The real smile. The one that reached his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were worn, the metal smooth from use. He separated one from the ring. It was the key to the old farm truck, the one he used for errands for life. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "In case you need to go anywhere," he said. It wasn't a key to the house, but it was more intimate. It was a key to his world. A key that said, "You belong here. You have a place here. You're not a guest anymore." It was a tangible act of commitment. A promise. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. A new routine began to form. One that was unwritten, unspoken, but as real and steady as the rising sun. It started with coffee. I was always the first one up, a habit from years of early morning writing sessions. I make a pot, the rich, dark smell filling the quiet kitchen. A little while later, Caleb would come in from his first round of chores, his boots left by the door. He'd pour himself a mug, his hand brushing mine as he reached for the sugar. That simple, unintentional touch was no longer a jolt of panic. It was a soft, grounding reassurance. "Good morning. You're still here. I'm still here." He never said thank you for the coffee. He didn't need to. He'd just give me a small, sleepy smile, and we'd stand by the window for a few minutes, sipping from our mugs, watching the world wake up. We didn't talk much in those moments. The silence was a comfortable one now, a shared space rather than an empty one. It was filled with the quiet hum of a new, fragile domesticity. I set my laptop up on the big, worn kitchen table. My dissertation, my fortress of solitude, was no longer hidden away in a guest room. It was out in the open, a part of the house, a part of our shared life. I'd write for hours, the rhythmic click of the keys, accompanied by the sounds of the farm filtering in through the open window, the distant lowing of cattle, the rumble of the tractor, the sound of Caleb's hammer on a stubborn post. He was the soundtrack to my work now, a constant, comforting presence at the edge of my consciousness. Sometimes he'd come in for lunch, tracking in the smell of sun and earth. He'd drop a freshly picked tomato on my open textbook, a silent offering. I'd make us sandwiches and we'd eat them on the porch steps, our shoulders brushing. He'd tell me about the farm, about the intricacies of soil pH and the stubbornness of a particular cow. I'd tell him about my research, about the lives of farmers 100 years ago who walked this same land. He listened, really listened, asking questions that were sharp and insightful. He saw the patterns too. We fell into a rhythm of work. I started helping him in the afternoons. My hands, once soft and useless, began to toughen. I learned the difference between a Phillips and a flathead, how to properly strain a wire fence, how to drive the ancient farm truck without stalling it. I was clumsy, I was slow, but I was learning, and he was a patient teacher. He'd stand behind me, his hands guiding mine, his voice a low rumble in my ear. In those moments, the farm didn't feel like his world anymore. It felt like ours. The nights were the best. After a long day, after a shared meal, we'd sit on the porch swing, the sky above us a riot of stars you could never see in the city. The air would cool, and he'd drape a blanket over our laps. We'd talk for hours. He told me about his father, a hard man who loved the land but didn't know how to love his son. He told me about his fears of failing, of being the generation that lost the farm. I told him about my own family, about the pressure to be a successful academic, about the loneliness I had mistaken for independence. We unpacked our lives, our fears, our quiet sorrows, laying them gently in the safe space we had created between us. And when the talking was done, we'd go inside. We slept in the same bed now. There was no anxiety, no hesitation. Just the simple, profound comfort of his body next to mine, a warm, solid anchor in the dark. Falling asleep to the steady rhythm of his breathing was the most peaceful sound I had ever known. I looked at my life, at the person I had been just a few weeks ago, and I barely recognized him. I had come to this farm seeking a quiet place to finish a story about the past. I hadn't realized I was stumbling into the beginning of my own. My old life, with its rigid routines and carefully constructed walls, seemed like a black and white photograph of a stranger. This life, with its mud and its sweat and its shared vulnerability, was in vibrant, breathtaking color. Caleb was the ultimate plot twist. He was the disruption I never knew I needed, the force of nature that had dismantled my fortress and shown me what it was to truly live, not just exist. He hadn't just given me a key to his truck. He had given me a key to a future I had never been brave enough to imagine for myself. My fear of emotional risk had been replaced by the quiet, steady courage that came from being truly seen and truly loved. The solitude I had once cherished was just a poor substitute for the profound connection I'd found here, in the most unexpected of places, with the most unexpected of men. He was no longer a planet I orbited from a safe distance. He was my home. He was my center of gravity. And I was finally in place. It's funny how you can spend your life building walls to keep the world out, only to find that all you ever really wanted was for one person to be brave enough to knock them down. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed the trajectory of your life? A person who unexpectedly became your entire world? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing for more stories about finding love where you least expect it.